Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name's Ace. My pronouns are she, her, they, them, he, him. As long as it's respectful, I am 100% okay with any of them. Most people I know, just based on how I'm dressed that day, and how I'm presenting, and we just move on from there. So today's video is going to be just an overview of the supplies that I typically use in my artwork. If there's ever a deviation from them, I'll make it known at the beginning of the video, if possible. However, generally speaking, these are the same tools that I use pretty repetitively. The only thing that's new is I have some newer paper types that I'm starting to experiment with, as well as the paper I normally buy. So there will be some of that in the coming videos, and let's just jump right in. So first and foremost, I am a firm believer of tools are valid art forms. That means stencils, rulers, anything you use that goes into creating your own piece is valid. That's how we learn. I can draw a pretty damn good circle without a stencil. However, the work I do is extremely precise, and so I prefer to use a circle stencil so I can make sure that my lines are exactly where they need to be to look nice. I could do it without the circle stencil, but it's going to take me longer, and it's not going to look as professional if I don't use the stencils. I'm a firm believer that if you are creating, whatever tools you are comfortable using are valid, as long as you're not stealing other people's ideas and not crediting them or not selling your work as a result of stealing someone else's idea. Then you do you, and don't listen to these people who are like, well, if you use this, you're not real. You're a real artist. I'm going to say that firmly. You are a real artist. If you do this for the passion, for the joy, for selling it if you choose to, for not selling it if you choose to, you are an artist. It might not look like Picasso. It might not look like any other artist, but you're an artist. Just believe in yourself. All right, mom talk's done. Let's get into the video. First and foremost, pencils. So I use usually mechanical pencils. I typically use the 0.7 size, mostly because when I'm drawing and sketching, 90% of the time those lines are going to be completely erased or inked over. So I go very lightly with the mechanical pencil just to map out where I approximately want things. Often when I'm in the lining process, you'll see this a lot. I will deviate from the lines I sketched on and decide, no, I want a wider petal here. So unless I'm doing like precise work, like the geometric work, and I'm working with something like a flower, sometimes when I'm inking, I will change the placement of stuff, which I know seems like it's tempting fate. But it's worked out so far, because usually when I'm in that point, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, this line needs to be here, not here. And I'll point that out as I do it once we get into the videos of me making stuff. I use a gum eraser usually. I use kneaded erasers as well. I have a couple other erasers that I've used, but these ones, for some reason, they erase the best. I don't know why, but they do, especially for how much I'm usually erasing, because I do a lot of gridding before I put my design down. So once I've got everything else inked, I then have to erase the entire grid in the background. So the width of this eraser, which is about 1.5 inches wide, is really great to flatly erase large sections at a time. Next up, I typically ink with microns. I have recently bought some new stuff to ink with. The thing that I'm not so certain about is the liquid blender over the Inkonic ones. I gotta test it out a little more. It seems to run a little bit, but I think that might be just because I had too much liquid blender on my brush. and not enough colored pencil in the area I was blending into to really work with that. So I will give you updates as I play with these more, but they're a really affordable option. They write really nicely. They're a lot like Micron in size, and they're actually really dark. They're darker than the Micron, which surprised me. So that's a really big bonus point if I can figure out the liquid blenders with these. These are Arteza rollerball pens. They're really nice. These ones do not hold up to liquid blending, which is fine because I do use a pencil blender sometimes. So these are just my working with Prismacolor lining pens now. That is totally fine. I'm just glad I figured that out on a test piece of paper versus trying to blend on a actual drawing that I intended to keep or sell. So that's a big important step. Test your markers and the other materials you're using to make sure there's no issues. With that being said, let's move into what my liquid blender is. I plan to buy some Gamsol at some point, which is the technical colored pencil liquid blender. And when I do that, I will do a compare and contrast video with what I've been using to the official art brand of liquid blender. This is what I've been using. Use it in a well-ventilated area if you do this. Know that this is odorless mineral spirits, so it thins oil-based paint, stain, and varnish. So it works really well on oil-based colored pencils, like Arteza, for example. They're a harder core colored pencil, and so they work really well for blending them out. And smoothing the transition between colors. You don't want very much of this on your brush at a time because it will get muddy looking if you use too much at once, or it'll like make almost like a puddle effect in your pencil drawing, and unless you want that effect, it's not very attractive compared to the rest of it. It comes out a milky white color but dries clear. I usually pour this into a small little container to dip my brush into, so I'm not having to guess where the level is, because I think it's like down to there or so already. So dipping my brush all the way in isn't the most effective way to use it. It does need to be shaken too before you use it. For that, because that is essentially paint thinner, not essentially, it is paint thinner, I have paintbrushes that I have marked with duct tape. So I know these are the brushes that I use for blending colored pencils with my paint thinner. So I don't accidentally use these for my acrylic paint, because that wouldn't work out well, because no matter how much I rinse these off, they usually have some sort of residue on them from using paint thinner with the colored pencils. You can see that they're actually kind of dyed from constant use. And that pigment's not necessarily in them like it comes off on paper anymore. It's just dyed the brushes at this point, because I've had those same ones for about a year. Moving into Arteza colored pencils. These are my babies lately. I discovered Arteza last year. I was Prisma before that. I still use Prisma, but the color selection, the price, and the fact that I can use my electric sharpener on these and they don't break, it makes me so excited. And they blend with the liquid blender, which is great for my hands because I do have arthritis. So they have a really large color selection, which is fantastic. Please note that this is the 128 pack, plus I bought another pack to replace some of the pencils that I had been using a lot of. I think it was the 48 pack, could have been the 72 pack. So there's more in here than what you get if you order their largest pack. Just keep that in mind. And this is not sponsored. If Arteza wants to sponsor me, I will 100% take it, but it's not sponsored. So yeah, these are all of my Arteza colored pencils, and I'm in love with how many greens they have. One thing I find really difficult about a lot of colored pencil brands is there's a very limited selection of greens, and they tend to go very light to very dark very fast. So it's hard to get a good gradient without a lot of attention to the blending process. Whereas if you have a large range to start with, you can choose 3 colors in the same range that have enough variation to get the gradient you want without having to literally spend so long figuring out how to layer the pencils to get that gradient you want with really wide range colors. The yellows are fantastic. I have been doing a lot of sunflowers. I just did a daffodil the other day, which I'll show you in a few. So yellow has become one of my most used pencils. This last year, I love the color yellow. I'm not gonna lie. It's one of my favorite colors, which I guess is unfair to say because all the colors are my favorite colors, but I've been really obsessed with yellow lately. There's also a really great red selection. And then the earth tones. At first I was like, what am I going to do with all these earth tones? But I have found that even though I don't use them as much as the colors, they work really well for accenting and for blending in areas to give depth that I hadn't experimented with before. So they're definitely unused compared to some of the other ones, but they have a lot of value, and I want to start getting into using them more just on their own and start experimenting with that. Then there's a ton of gray and black gradients as well, which is super useful. They even came with metallics, which are really cool. The other colored pencil that I use, in this case specifically, are my favorite castels. I only have 6 of these guys right now. I plan to buy more. They're really great. I bought these ones specifically for a pastel drawing that I did last June for part of my Pride series on TikTok. Mostly because they were the only open stock pastels I found that I really liked at the time. Michaels was out of some of the Prisma pastel colors in their open stock area, so I ended up buying these ones, and I don't regret it. They're actually really, really nice colored pencils, and I'm excited to explore those more as I become the colored pencil queen and have all the colored pencils. Moving on, let's get into Prismas. I love Prismas. They're great, but I find that they break very easily because they're softcore, and that's extremely frustrating and can be quite costly to have to keep replacing, especially things like crimson red. I draw a lot of roses. This tends to be my main color in said roses. This is my 6th crimson red Prismacolor pencil in the last year and a half. And that's considering I've been using my Arteza a lot. I've gone through 6 of these. That's a lot. It really is. They're like 2 something a pencil for open stock. And I definitely haven't made that many pictures that I should have gone through that many. A lot of it was just breakage when trying to sharpen it. That being said, Prismacolor sharpener through and through. Save your Prismacolors. The electric sharpeners and other sharpeners break them worse than just investing the $7 and getting this guy. And even then, you still have to be gentle because they do break. The biggest thing I go through in Prismas are my colorless blenders. Now, it makes sense that I go through so many of these because I use them to blend full drawings. I've probably gone through about 6 in the last 2 years of these. But these don't break as easily, so they hold up a lot better. You can see I was blending red last, so it's got a little red residue on there, but these are super, super useful. The only downside is having to press really hard, so that hurts my arthritis, but it's fine. Moving on. Tools. I primarily do geometric art, so I use a lot of tools, and these are the most common ones. I have my handy dandy protractor. This is fantastic for making my grids, especially when I'm doing a circle, flowery type design. I usually do my lines at 45 degrees each from a part, or each all the way around. And so being able to mark that off easily without having to try and figure out the math of using a ruler to mark them off in a circular motion is really helpful. This guy's newer to me. My sister actually brought it over because she doesn't use it very often. I haven't worked in ellipses much yet, but I plan to give this guy a shot for a couple designs coming up, and I'll take you guys along for the journey for at least one of those. I'll probably do a couple test practice ones, figure out what I want to do before I record that video. Next up, I have this ruler. This one is fantastic because it has the measurement on both sides. So instead of having to measure, move down the paper and measure and mark the same spot, I can just mark on both sides and then turn my ruler this way and draw on it. Ignore the paint. I spilled paint on it the other day while working on canvas. The next one is just a triangle clear ruler. Has the different grid types on it on each side. This one's super useful for when I'm working in my smaller sketchbooks because it's easier to angle it in to the sketchbook than the 18-inch double-sided ruler. That being said, if anyone knows of a smaller version of that ruler that has the measurements on both sides that's still clear and see-through, let me know. Most clear rulers have cms on one side and inches on the other, and I need one that has either cms on both sides or inches on both sides. That's why that one's such a crucial part of my art. Up next, I've got my circle templates. These get so much use. I've got the smaller circles and I've got the larger circles, and they are my absolute favorite. Again, tools do not make you less of an artist. You are valid as an artist, even if you use stencils. Moving on. Paper. As I mentioned earlier, I use a variety of different paper types. I normally work on mixed media. The only time I don't usually work on a mixed media paper type is if I'm sketching specifically just for sketch practice or watercolor, which case I use watercolor paper. In my first video, I showed you some of the black drawings I did. It's just on this Kanzen black paper. Super, super fun. I look forward to doing more pieces. I haven't drawn on black paper in a while, so I'm excited to just get into that and bring you guys along for that journey. Then I also have my Kanzen XL mixed media. This is just a 7x10 book, smaller than I usually work. I normally work on 9x12s, but the 7x10 is super useful, especially for just practice sketching or just working on a smaller surface, depending on what I'm doing. I recently got the Arteza brand toned gray paper in 9x12, and this beauty is the first thing I have ever drawn on toned gray paper that I've shared. I've done a few sketches on some that my sister lent me, but nothing I necessarily felt compelled to share. I really love that the background just brings out these white highlights even more than they would if this was on a white piece of paper. So I'm so excited to get into using this more and bringing you guys along for that learning process. Then I also have the Arteza mixed media paper in 9x12, as well as multiple Kanzen books of this. It's honestly, mixed media paper is just what I do because I use the liquid blender sometimes, and it also holds up to Sharpie and other things. If I'm doing Sharpie only drawings, sometimes I'll use Bristol paper just because it's easier to hold the ink, especially in large amounts like that. But overall, I mostly stick with the mixed media because it's what has worked the best for me. I know this was a little bit of a long video, but I appreciate you for coming to my channel and watching. The next one I think will just be showing basic designs that I do. That way you can just get introduced to how I format stuff and how I lay things out. And we'll go from there. And if you have comments or suggestions of videos you would like to see, drop them in the comments below, and I will see you next time.